I wanted to provide just a brief update related to the governor's executive order, maybe in some simplified terms. We've put together a little slide presentation to walk you through that takes some of those shops and requirements for those shops and businesses, and hopefully, like I say, simplifies them a little bit. So let's take a look at the slide presentation. His executive order that was issued on the 20th, which was Monday, allows certain practices to open on April 24th, which is this Friday. Gyms, fitness centers, bowling alleys, body art studios, estheticians, hair designers, and massage therapists can open those practices subject to certain requirements that we'll look at in a minute. Practices that are allowed to open on Monday would include restaurants for in-house dining, again, provided that some of the requirements can be met. The other thing I think of noteworthiness is that healthcare practices may open as soon as practical. So, that includes a variety of things, not only doctors, but dentists and folks like that, as long as they can also practice safe distancing requirements in certain situations and practice some other things that are required. Some of the measures, and these are pretty extensive in the order. Again, we've tried to simplify them a little bit. But the measures that must be implemented by all of these businesses that choose to open are, number one, screening of the workers for any kind of activity that may seem like flu-like symptoms. Any workers that are exhibiting signs of those type symptoms cannot report. They have to have enhanced sanitization at the workplace, which could include, among other things, hand sanitizer and certain restrictions for using it when you come in, or certain requirements. Hand washing by workers is required. PPEs for certain workers within businesses. Now that's personal protective devices. Examples of those might be a face shield, it might be a mask within certain type businesses that must be used. There are no worker gatherings permitted at the location. Workers have to be permitted to distance during mealtime and breaks, such as going outside or working in alternate areas, taking alternate areas to do these kind of things. And they have to allow teleworking for workers where it's possible. Other measures, they have to be able to provide staggered shifts if possible, if their business would allow them to still do the service on those staggered shift types. They still have to practice virtual meetings where they can. They have to use remote delivery of intangible services if possible. And this would be things like you've been seeing at the restaurants, curbside, drive up, and some of those type things that if you can offer your service by that, those are still encouraged. They are not allowed to use personal property from one client to the next or share tools. So I guess a perfect instance of that would be maybe a beautician who shares razors or shares scissors among different clients. They would not be able to do that, or they're discouraged from doing that. No unnecessary person-to-person contact. So again, I think, again, not to pick on beauticians, but I guess I use them as an example of basically, I think what's envisioned is having a client come in, PPEs are present, hygiene's present, sanitization's present. They conduct the business using their tools on that client. They sanitize after that client leaves, and then that client leaves the establishment and doesn't hang around to gather or come within a 6-foot distance of anybody. It does state that they have to post a notice that encourages hand hygiene. Again, does not require that hand hygiene to take place at the door, but encourages patrons to use some form of hand hygiene. It suspends use of pen pads in similar means where possible. And I know that there's been some questions about that. So it's very clear that the pen pad, where you enter your code, whether it's for a credit card or a debit card, I think, in fact, under previous orders, this was recommended. This is required unless that credit card company does not have any alternate means of allowing you to use their service other than by pen pad or electronic signature. So again, it does suspend that unless the credit card company only has that as an outlet for use. It does require them to practice the social distancing. That social distancing, as a reminder, no more than 6 feet between persons. You can't have more than 10 people in a room where you can't practice that. So it still requires that distancing to be enforced. And finally, you have to be able to provide alternate points of sale. Where possible, and that's between retailers and service providers. So again, if you could do your sale outside of a building in another location, that would still be recommended. Again, encourages an increase in physical space between workers and customers. That might be limiting the number of customers that are in a workplace at one time, which would satisfy that. They must provide disinfectant and sanitation products for the workers. So while it's not mandatory that they provide it for customers coming in, although recommended, they do have to provide that for the workers, and they do have to sanitize. And finally, they must increase that physical space between workers at work sites to at least 6 feet. So again, we go back to the 6-foot rule again. You have to keep the distance between customers at 6 feet. You have to keep distances between workers at 6 feet. And then, again, just as a reminder, in no business where there are more than 10 people or where 10 people or more are going to gather, you have to be able to adhere to the 6-foot rule. I want to talk a minute about local changes pursuant to the governor's order. There were none. The county offices continue to be closed to walk-in traffic. Service is still being provided, but the only changes locally would be to comply with the governor's orders to help enforce and help make sure these businesses do what they're supposed to do as they reopen. Our parks are only open for passive recreation or separated exercise, i.e. walking trails. But again, you have to be able to practice the 6-foot rule even at that. And again, just as a reminder, there are no gathering or events of 10 people or more where that 6-foot rule cannot be observed. Boat ramps and fishing continue to be allowed pursuant to the above, which is that distancing rule. And again, county buildings are closed to traffic. One last thing, I guess, on recommendations. Locally, we recommend that you continue to practice the CDC recommendations for distancing and hand washing, that you try to remain at home except for essential travel only, and that if you choose to visit one of those businesses that is going to open, please make sure they're compliant with the requirements. If not, a suggestion is to bring that to their attention, and then report any obvious violations to the local authorities once you've brought that to their attention if they seem to not want to comply with those regulations. Churches, while they still remain open and actually could have congregational services inside pursuant to the 6-foot rule, are not encouraged to do so at this time. They're encouraged to continue to find an alternate means of service. So again, in closing, just want to kind of do that for you. We'll try to post these things online, and please feel free to go to our Facebook page and post your questions. We'll be checking that periodically so that we can answer any of those that you have as we continue forward, and we just ask that you be safe.